Success is more dangerous than failure, because if we're successful in the world's eyes and the eyes of other people, it's very easy to become self-reliant, and you stop asking God for a vote. You stop asking him to cast a vote. You have resources, you have opportunities, and you can do things on your own. You become self-reliant. So I think it begins with really making sure you're asking God the question, God, what do you want?
Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. We long to see the body of Christ look like Jesus. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. Today, we have a fantastic conversation with Hal Donaldson, the founder and president of Convoy of Hope, a global humanitarian organization that has helped over 200 people in need. Hal has an incredible story. Growing up in poverty after his father was tragically killed, experiencing the kindness of strangers, then feeling called to dedicate his life to serving the poor and marginalized. What I found so compelling about this conversation is how Hal has wrestled with the tension between ambition, drive, and burnout. As Convoy of Hope has grown into one of the largest charities in the United States, Hal has had to learn hard lessons about the importance of self-care, boundaries, and staying grounded in his relationship with God. He shares practical tips he's implemented, like no problem solving after 8 o'clock, no dinner meetings, and protecting vacation time. Hal also reflects deeply on the role of humility and dependence on God for leaders, how success can actually be more dangerous than failure if it leads to self-reliance. His insights on the difference between acting humble and truly embodying a humble spirit are really thought-provoking. Ultimately, this is a conversation about how to sustain a life of service and compassion over the long haul. And Hal has won some hard-won wisdom, and he has a lot of wisdom to share. And I think his story will resonate with anyone trying to make a difference in the world while also caring for their own well-being, their soul, and their relationship with God and their family. It's a delicate balance, but one that Hal has clearly wrestled with and learned from. So join us. Here's my conversation with Hal Donaldson. Hal, welcome to Shifting Culture. Excited to have you on. Thank you so much for joining me.
Good to be with you, Joshua, and congratulations on the podcast.
Thank you. It's been fun talking to a bunch of great leaders that can teach us how to live a little bit like Jesus. And so I think that's one of the things that our culture needs. And so I'd love to just jump into your story so that we could just frame who you are, where you're coming from, what Convoy of Hope is. So can you take me back to your childhood? What was some things that really shaped you and formed you that you think probably set you on this path, this journey that you're on now?
Yeah, when I was 12 years of age, my parents were hit by a drunken driver, and my father was killed instantly. My mother was seriously injured, would be in the hospital for a number of months, and unable to work for quite some time. My parents didn't have insurance, and the man who hit them didn't have insurance, and so our family was forced to survive on welfare. And often the cupboards were empty. Had to go to school without a sack lunch in our hands, had holes in our shoes. But Joshua, I'll take you back to the night of the accident. Police officers came to our door, and they delivered the news that our parents had been hit. But that night, a number of friends and neighbors began to gather in the front yard, and the police officer stepped up to the porch, and he addressed the crowd, probably about 30 people. And he just said, are there any family members here or any close friends who are willing to take the 4 children home with them tonight? I'm the oldest of 4 kids, and at first no one responded. But then one young couple raised their hands and they said, we'll take them. And their names are Bill and Levada Davis. And all Bill and Levada owned was a small trailer. They were relatively new Christians. They had a single wide trailer and kids of their own, and yet they invited us to live with them. I'm sure they thought it was going to be a 1 or 2 night sleepover, but we ended up living with the Davises for about a year. And the Davises just really, they drained their savings account. They sacrificed their privacy so 4 kids could have a home. And, to this day, I say that I didn't choose a life of bitterness, in large part because of people like the Davises and a local church who, time and again, they would see we had needs for shoes. They would put shoes on our feet. Times that the local church would bring groceries to our door. So as a kid, I experienced the shame of poverty. I know what it's like to go into stores with food stamps, but I also experienced the power of kindness, and that would really alter the course of my life. Fast forward, I thought the best way to escape poverty was through education. I went out, worked my way through college, earned several degrees, and I began writing books in my 20s. And I was in my late 20s when I was invited to write a book for some missionaries in Calcutta, India. And when I landed, the missionary said, well, we want you to interview Mother Teresa for our book. And so here I was, one-on-one interview with Mother Teresa. And in the course of that interview, she just stopped me and she just said, young man, let me ask you, what are you doing to help the poor and the suffering? And I figured I'd better not lie to her. So I told her the truth. I said, I'm really not doing much of anything. And she said this. She said, everyone can do something. Just do the next kind thing that God puts in front of you. And all I can tell you, Joshua, was that, that one line really changed the course of my life. I felt so convicted. And then to just continue on the story, I came back from that trip and I just was so conflicted with the life I was leading and the life I was being called to. And I was praying one day and I felt like God just dropped an idea in my heart to write a book and to travel to 8 cities and to live in the streets for 3 days and 3 nights, to interview drug addicts and gang members, prostitutes, runaways, to ride with the police on the midnight shift, and to take all those stories and combine them into a book. And all I can tell you is that God broke my heart in the streets of America. And I came back and loaded up a pickup truck with $300 worth of groceries and started passing them out to working poor families in California where I was living. And that was the start of Convoy of Hope 30 years ago.
Wow. It's an incredible story, but there's a lot of life lived in that, just in that little story right there. And take me back then into the Davises. What is it like? And then afterwards, when it was your mom and you guys, as you're living on welfare, talk about what is the shame of poverty and the alleviation with food and clothing, shoes that people have helped you with, that like you were met with kindness. And then where was the spiritual component of your life then, and were your spiritual needs being met at the same time? What was it like to be on that side and to receive both physical and spiritual help?
Yeah, I felt there were many times that I had kind of a woe is me attitude. I didn't understand how a loving God could take my father from us, allow him to be killed. And meanwhile, the man who hit them walked out of jail 48 hours later with no consequence whatsoever. So as a teen, I was asking God, where's the justice in all of that? And I honestly believe that if it wasn't for the kindness, the acts of kindness, I would have chosen a life of bitterness. But it was them wrapping their arms around me that I think allowed me to see that God was good. I didn't understand why my father had been taken. I didn't see the good in that at all. I didn't like going to school with, poor clothes and being bullied. I didn't like being a second-class citizen, but it was their kindness that showed me that Jesus was kind too, that Jesus was showing his kindness for me, his care and his love for me through them. One day, Bill Davis, the person I was living with as a 12-year-old, he came and he saw that I was hurting. He threw his arm over my shoulder and he whispered this in my ear. He said, Hal, listen to me. Don't allow the tragedy of your youth to become a lifelong excuse, because where you start in life doesn't have to dictate where you end. And those words, they stuck. But what happens when when you're raised poor, you begin a quest not to be poor anymore. And that was certainly the journey I was on. I earned several degrees. Like I said, writing books, and I was about building my bank account and building my career. I certainly wasn't about helping other people. That wasn't really my quest. I just wanted to escape my upbringing. But it was the kindness of people that I think really left me or helped me escape a life that I was headed towards, which was a life of anger.
This whole idea that faith and politics should not mix, there's slivers of truth in that, but mostly non-truth in that, because it basically means that we as Christians should not allow our faith to influence how we view things, should not allow our faith to influence what we get involved in. And the fact of the matter is, our faith should permeate every aspect of our lives.
Well, that's, I think, beautiful that there is some kindness of strangers and that you could actually then be the kind one to others and show compassion to lead them somewhere else. And one thing that, Mother Teresa did for you as she called something out, just asked you a question. What are you doing to help the poor? And how have you seen that play out in other times in your life as you lead an organization that has helped many? The questions, the promptings towards other people, how have you seen the same types of thing that Mother Teresa did for you doing for other people?
Yeah, I believe that God wants to help the poor and the suffering, people in need, more than we do. And he's just looking for people he can work through. And when you understand that you're just a channel of God's blessing, of Christ's love to other people, our job is just to keep that channel open so that we hear God's voice and we respond to needs. And, I think that's really been the story of Convoy of Hope. I never really set out to start any kind of a charity. I didn't want to start a charity, but the charity became necessary because God was blessing it and it was growing it so fast. And that's when it became necessary. But really, Convoy of Hope was just an expression of what was happening in my heart, just trying to do the next kind thing. God took it places I never dreamed possible.
I think once things start to grow and build with Convoy, I'm sure one of the things that you're set in is a chaotic and frenetic life, that you are going 110%, that you're going full throttle, and it's really, you could see that was what was happening in your 20s as you were building your bank account. Now, as you're building an organization, you're trying to do the same thing, but with a place of compassion and care for other people. Where do you see that identity of striving and trying to build something on your own in both of those areas of your life?
Yeah, one of the things we talk a lot about at Convoy is that we're not trying to build an organization. We just want to be used by Jesus to be a catalyst, a spark for a movement of compassion. And I think what happens a lot of times is that the organization and building the machine becomes more important than the overall goal, which is to have an effect on the kingdom of God and to make a difference in the world. And so repeatedly over this 30-year journey, we talk about that if Convoy gets larger and we can help more people, that's great, but that's not the most important thing. And that's why Convoy of Hope is really I would say, a supply chain to churches and ministries around the world. Everything we do is in conjunction with local churches. It's because Convoy of Hope, we'll be gone someday, but the local church remains. And so, for us building Convoy, I like to say that I believe that God had an idea. I simply raised my hand 30 years ago and said, God, I'll try. And he has multiplied it. It's now, according to Forbes, it's the 35th largest charity in the United States. Out of 1.5 million charities, it's number 35. God has blessed. He's helped us. We've helped over 200 million people, distributed $2.5 billion in donated food supplies, and those numbers just continue to grow. But I can honestly say it's not been about building the organization. It's about fulfilling God's mandate to expose people to the love of Jesus.
So as you look at Jesus, you look at the Gospels and what he did, I'll just give you a brief summary of our story. My wife and I were in the Middle East. We worked with Syrian refugees. And so we would distribute food packages, diapers, milk for families. And then we would also share stories of Jesus and try to see if somebody's drawn to Jesus, and then help build churches there, mostly home churches because they're all Muslim background people. And so as we were doing that, and the people that were in that area, there was really two different types of people. One said, hey, I'm going to take what Jesus said to his disciples, that the poor will always be with you, and don't worry about helping the poor, the hungry, and the needy. I'm just going to work on the spiritual side of things. And others say, hey, if they don't have anything to eat, they're not going to be able to hear anything as well. As you look at Jesus, what is a holistic view of helping people so that all of life and their whole person can be touched with the love of God?
Jesus met both physical and spiritual needs. He met emotional needs. And we've been called to emulate Jesus. So it's not one or the other, it's both and. And, at Convoy, we understand the fact that we can't meet every need. We can't feed every child. We're feeding right now 600,000 children a day in countries around the world. We want to be feeding 1 million. We're on a quest to do that. But again, we can't do everything. And I think it's important to understand that when Jesus walked the earth, Jesus did not heal everyone. He did not feed everyone. He didn't meet every need. But he did do everything that his Father asked him to do. And that's why prayer is such an important component to compassion work. We need to have an initial inclination to meet needs. We should. But we should also pause and ask God if it's something he's wanting you to do. Is Jesus wanting to love that person and to meet that need through us? And there have been times in my life when it's been pretty clear that although my heartstrings have been pulled and I'm wanting to meet a need, that Jesus is asking me to use restraint. And I think there are various reasons for that. But I think it's really important to have a strong prayer life in order to have an effective compassion ministry.
Well, you need it. I mean, you're looking at compassion fatigue a lot, where if you just pour yourself out and you don't actually get anything in you, in a prayer life, abiding with Jesus, you're going to go off the deep end with compassion fatigue, and you're just going to be done. How do you start to deal with the I would say secondhand trauma of working with the poor and the marginalized?
Yeah, I think it comes back to what I was saying before about understanding that we are a channel of his blessing and his love to other people. And I think what happens is that you can become overwhelmed with the need. And when you become overwhelmed, that channel kind of closes and you begin to circle the wagons, if you will. And I think one of the things I guess I've discovered is that I can't meet every need, but I know that Jesus loves people and he wants to work through me. And I'm going to do everything I possibly can without sacrificing my own physical, emotional, and spiritual health. And the book I just wrote, that's really what it's about. It's about how do you take care of yourself and serve a hurting world? And the book is called What Really Matters. And, it's really about setting priorities, but also setting boundaries for our lives. And I think a lot of times for me in the earlier days, I was operating from a place of deficit. I was working at 125%. I was traveling the world, meeting a lot of needs, doing a lot of good things, but probably making sacrifices that God wasn't asking me to make. And, I think we all need balance. And really, that's what the book's about.
And we need balance. You just said something that I think is important that people are going to say, so how do we do that? How do we know that we're making sacrifices that God is not asking us to make? What does that discernment process look like?
Yeah, a lot of times it's the people around you who discern it before you do. You're driven, I was driven, and I'm just out there, full throttle, just trying to meet as many needs as I can. But it was my family, it was my friends who were recognizing the fact that I was trying to do too much. And I think this is where friendships are so important. A lot of times leaders surround themselves with what I would call cheerleaders. They really, and they're surrounding themselves with opportunists, people who are trying to get from them. Surround yourself with people who use wisdom, who are godly, who are faithful, who are obedient, humble, who are going to tell you the truth. Surround yourself with truth tellers, not necessarily cheerleaders, because those are the people who will probably recognize when you are going too far. In my case, when I was 50, I found myself in an operating room with an operation on my heart. And while I was recovering in the hospital, I just felt like God was telling me, Hal, you're doing things I've not asked you to do. You're living up to other people's expectations, but not mine. I'm not asking you to do those things. And, I had a real moment with the Lord where it became very clear to me that, I was ambitious. I was driven, in large part because of where I'd come from. But I was ambitious to a point where it was reckless. It was reckless ambition. My family was paying a price. My body, my emotions, my spirit was paying a price. And so I think, bottom line I think make sure you surround yourself with people who will tell you the truth.
That's great. I mean, you need those truth tellers. They're not always easy to find, but you do need those truth tellers, because you could do a lot when you're going full throttle, 125%, and you can start to build and grow some things. How do we slow down as leaders to then help give away some of the leadership? What is giving away leadership and giving away some of these jobs to build the organization, build other people, so that they could step into what God is actually asking them to sacrifice and them to work through in their own lives?
I wrote this book because I was being bombarded with questions from organizational leaders, pastors, business leaders. And the question they were asking is, well, how do you grow an organization so fast? How do you grow business or a church so fast as Convoy? And, my response was, well, the most important thing is that you take care of yourself. Make sure you're strong, you're healthy, both physically, emotionally, and spiritually, because you are, as the leader, are the foundation. God builds upon the heart. If your heart is flawed, if you are weak, what happens is God will only build so tall. But if the foundation is strong, there's no limit to what God can do. Well, I would tell leaders that, Joshua. I would say, hey, that's where you start. And they would say, well, I get that, but what are the organizational adjustments, the moves you made, right? And so I said, well, hey, I'm going to just put it in a book. And the book is filled with principles, but also practical ideas. It's very biblical, practical ideas. If I could just share with you some things I did, that coming out of the hospital at age 50, these are some of the changes that I made. One is that I no longer spent time after 8 o'clock at night worrying about problems or trying to solve problems. Because here's what was happening. I would be thinking about it at 8 o'clock, then 10 o'clock, 12 o'clock. I'm lying awake in bed at 2 o'clock trying to solve tomorrow's problems. So, I set an 8 o'clock deadline, no problem solving after 8 o'clock. And because what happens is if you're losing sleep, you're stealing from tomorrow. And, I think there's something biblical about that. Let tomorrow's problems take care of themselves, right? And so that's one of the things I did. Secondly,
Let's go into. I want to stop there, and then I want to do some more practical things. But because have a global organization and there's global problems, and so tomorrow's problems are already happening when you are saying I'm done at 8 o'clock, because they're already tomorrow is already happening somewhere in the world. So what do boundaries look like then in that practical step of saying, okay, after 8 o'clock, I'm done? How do we keep the boundaries with our other leaders around the world that are coming to you with their own problems?
Yeah. I believe that God is in control of time, and he doesn't want me sacrificing my sleep because he wants to solve problems the next day. And if I'm coming to work weary, exhausted, sleepless, he's not going to be able to speak to me the way he wants to speak to me. So, I found myself before I'd come to work exhausted with big bags under my eyes just because I would spend my sleeping hours trying to solve problems. And so, no, it's a good practice to get into. And, I think 8 hours, 8-hour delay it shouldn't be a problem for most cases.
Yeah.
So
let's hope so. So you implemented that 8 o'clock rule.
Yeah.
What else did you implement after?
Yeah. So I used to do meetings, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And I cut out dinner meetings. Rarely do I do dinner meetings. I'll do breakfast and lunch, but dinner is family time. It's time for my wife and my cute girls. I have 4 daughters. And so that was a great, important step because I began to have more time with family. And then maybe I'll mention a third thing that I do is I began to make vacations sacred. And at the beginning of the year, we would mark off when vacations came, and nothing would interfere with that. I remember one time, it was during a vacation, and I got an invitation to go to the Oval Office with 5 other leaders, and I declined. Because it was during a vacation. And as you can imagine, that sent a great message to my 4 daughters.
Yeah, I'm sure it did. And it actually probably freed up your soul a little bit as well. One of the things that you've mentioned, I don't know, maybe 5 or 6 times is listening for God to start to lead what you need to pick up and where you're headed. What does that look like for leaders to do that work? If I look around, one of the cultural assessments that I have within the body of Christ in America itself is that we basically just put a prayer at the beginning or end of meetings and call it Christian. And we're not really being led by God into the next thing. So what is that process, and how do we make sure that we're doing that and not just pretending to do it for the sake of others?
Yeah, success is more dangerous than failure, because if we're successful in the world's eyes and the eyes of other people, it's very easy to become self-reliant, and you stop asking God for a vote. You stop asking him to cast a vote. You have resources, you have opportunities, and you can do things on your own. You become self-reliant. So I think it begins with really making sure you're asking God the question, God, what do you want? And I think a lot of times when you're advanced, Convoy of Hope, 30 years in, and God has blessed, open doors, it's very easy to stop asking him that question. And when we become self-reliant and we get full of ourselves, we no longer hear God's voice. And, I think humility is such an important part. I'm God reliant. I am. When I was in my 40s, I wasn't. I was self-reliant. I wish back then that I had prayed more and worked less, quite honestly. I do. So I don't know, those are some of the principles, but the main thing is don't get full of yourself and stay humble, stay reliant on God, and keep asking him the right question.
Where is our focus? So if we want to care for ourselves for longevity, for the long haul, so that we could care for the world, what is our ultimate purpose, our ultimate aim? What are we starting to focus on that helps the caring for ourselves process in the midst of what we're doing, because we do want impact? So where's the balance there, and what are we supposed to focus on?
Yeah, I think sometimes because the mission is right, whether you're a pastor, you're a business leader, whatever God's called you to do, because we feel like we're on mission, we're fulfilling the mission that God has given us, it's easy to believe that you're inoculated from the consequences of poor decisions. I can tell you that if you're not taking care of yourself, there's a price to be paid. And that's a price that God doesn't want us to pay. And certainly in my story, in my case, I was paying that price that God wasn't asking me to pay. So, I think that's probably one principle that comes to mind, that, just balance really comes from obedience. And sometimes I think we get ahead of God and we start doing things he's not asking us to do.
Then let's focus a little bit. Let's look at you have some goals. Like, hey, we want to serve a million children a day by the year 2030. It's a great goal. It's a big number. And then you have some values. Like, you want to have compassion flow through the world. Like, compassion is a huge value for you. Where's the balance between going after goals and numbers and living out the values of the leader?
Yeah, I think it's understanding the word if. If God, it's your will, if you provide, if you can show us the way. And I think, we want to feed 1 million children. We believe it's God's heart, but we also understand that it's a big if. But here's something I started doing years and years ago. I write notes to God, and I'll write a need, or I'll write a question for God, a problem, and I'll write it on a piece of paper and I'll stick it in my wallet, or I'll stick it in my Bible or briefcase. And, it's those little pieces of papers that keep me reliant on God, help me understand that he's the God of if, that if he meets a need, we're going to do this. If he makes a way, we will do this. And I think it's that understanding that really breeds not self-reliance, but God reliance. And I think for me, just writing those notes has been a symbolic way of relying on God.
And how do you keep the organization at that space and that level as well? It does start with the leader, right? There's a foundation, it'll grow, and who you are is what you're going to reproduce more than what you say, right? Then as it flows out, it's a lot of people around the world that is in this organization. What does it look like then to have values and character and things to spread throughout the organization?
Yeah, I think first you said it well. As a leader, you have to model it. You have to live it. That's where it starts. If you don't live it, don't model it, then your words are empty. And but I think secondly, you have to become a broken record. And what I mean by that is you have to keep talking about it. I can tell you, I think our staff, our team, hundreds and hundreds of employees, 100,000 plus volunteers every year, I think they're weary of hearing me talk about humility and reliance on God and those sort of things, and they're tired of it probably, but they got to keep hearing it because to me, if you get that right, there's no limit to what God can do. And if you rely on Him, you keep your foundation strong, no limit whatsoever to what He can do.
I've heard some different theories of what a definition of humility is. As you're speaking humility to people, I think a lot of people will assume different things of what you're meaning. What do you mean by humility? What is humility for you?
Yeah, it's very easy to sound humble, and it's very easy to act humble. But I think each of us has an aura. We have a spirit. And when people are around us, it's kind of like that 3-foot rule. When people are around us, they sense whether or not you truly are full of yourself, you're playing a role, you're trying to perform Christianity at a high level, or you really are humble. They get it. So it's hard to define other than I believe it's an aura, a spirit more than anything else.
That's helpful. I think that, it exudes from the person, humility does itself. And so I think that is really helpful. As people have been reading your book, as it's been out now, and trying to implement some of these things so that they could care for themselves in the midst of leading and going the long haul, caring for others, has there been some feedback of that this piece is really difficult and really hard? It's like, how is this possible? What have been the difficult things for people to implement in their lives?
Yeah, change requires intentionality. And I had a call last night from a pastor, and he left me a 3-minute voice message. And he said, I'm tired. And he said, I didn't know whether I could just keep going. I read your book, and I realized that there's some things in my life that are out of balance. And just want you to know your book really encouraged me to keep going. And just again, he pointed out some of the principles and the practices that he's going to try to incorporate into his life. I've also had business leaders who have read the book, and I think it's been convicting for them because they didn't realize that that their family was paying a price for their ambition, if you will. The feedback has been really moving to me, honestly. It's been inspiring to me to hear people say that they're going to make some changes. And I just pray people don't have to learn the hard way like I did, when I found myself in an operating room.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to live that's not how I want to find out that I need different priorities. I like what you said. Change requires intentionality, because a lot of times we just expect change to happen. Either we're going to speak it out, it'll happen, or, we are going to just hope it's going to happen, and it happens. Intentionality, it requires some difficult things, difficult changes. Like, hey, I'm trying to eat differently than I did before, and there's going to be some desires that I have to live the way that I did in the past, but I have to actually be intentional to live a totally different way. It's easy to be in the rut of the past. How do we stay intentional and stay the course of change when our whole body desires to get back into the rut of what we were doing in the past?
Yeah. I think we have to ask ourselves this question: what's driving us? Is it selfish desires, or is it our duty to God? Are we driven by people's expectations? Are we driven by reckless pursuits, reckless ambition? So I think it begins with honesty, Joshua, asking ourselves, asking God, and then asking those who are close to us the right questions. I know in my case, again, lying in the hospital bed at age 50, my heart operated on. When I got out, I began asking my wife and my daughters, what do you think about how I've been living my life? And it was asking the right questions that really led to the right answers. So that would be my encouragement to people, is just make sure you're being honest with yourself and others.
I want to know, just briefly, what was it like working on this project with your daughter? And did that give you a different perspective of what really mattered?
Yeah, it helped because my daughter's a lawyer. She certainly bright, and but she's youthful, and being about the age of 30, it really helped. I think make the book more youthful and speak to people in their 20s and 30s. And I certainly don't speak in King James language, but anecdotes and illustrations that from my era really wouldn't communicate to a 20 or 30-year-old. So, she helped me with that. I think also it was therapeutic. And we had an opportunity to really talk about the journey we've been on. She's a great girl. But again, I go back to the fact it was the grace of God that kept my family, my daughters, loving God, loving me. My wife is a superstar. Yeah, I'm grateful for the opportunity. It's actually the third book that my daughter and I have had a chance to work on. So I think we've gotten better as we roll along.
That's cool. That's what a privilege to be able to have that and to be able to work with your daughter. When she's 30 years old and has, as a lawyer, has a life and family of her own. Like, that's a beautiful thing to be able to do that. So it's also something to say, oh, this is some of the stuff that really matters in life. One of the things I think, especially in Convoy of Hope, when you're dealing with poverty and hunger around the world, I would think it would be easy to be discouraged by all the injustice of the world. How do you have hope in the midst of the discouraging things that you get to see every day?
Yeah, I think it really comes from I've traveled all over the world. I think I've been in 85, 90, 100 countries. I'm not sure what the number is, but it has to do with the eyes. I've seen hopelessness in the eyes of people, and then I've seen how hope has invaded the eyes of people who were once hopeless. And that's really the power of food, hygiene kits, clothes, clean water. I believe there are millions of people that are one touch away from finding hope and finding Jesus. And, I don't want to get theological with you, but I believe that people have to experience a level of hope before they can really experience faith. They have to believe that there's something out there that can make their lives better. And I think it has to do with the eyes. I don't know that I've ever said that, but I think it's seeing people move from hopelessness to hope.
I just remember one of the refugees that we were working with, and when she told us that, I thank God that I experienced the war and the move to another country in the midst of tragedy and destruction, and then came with nothing. And I thank God that I'm here now because I found Jesus. And I would never have found Jesus without that. And even in the midst of really just a horrible situation that they find themselves in, that she was able to find some hope in the midst of it. And the hope that she found was in Jesus himself, and that she could start to live a totally new way of life. And that's beautiful that you see that hope in people's eyes as you walk through, because I could see the difference in her eyes from the moment we met to the moment where she had hope in Jesus. Yeah.
Joshua, I think a lot of times we are paralyzed by the magnitude of the need. The need is so great out there, and it's easy to tell yourself, well, I can't do everything, so I'm going to do nothing. But doing something, allowing Jesus to do something through you is always better than doing nothing. And I've found that to be the case, that God can take something small and really change someone's life.
So can you give me a story of a changed life that you have seen in Convoy of Hope recently?
Yeah. I was in Ethiopia, and we have a women's empowerment program. Every year, about 50,000 women and girls go through our program, and we're able to give many of the mothers who are poor job training and help them start their own business. Thousands of them start their own business. Now they can feed their own kids. So I was attending a graduation, and one after the other, a woman would come up and she would tell her story of where she had come from and how God had turned her life around. So the program ends, and a young woman comes up to me, and she pulls on my arm and she says, "You can't leave until you hear my story." And she proceeded to tell me that at the age of 13, that she had been raped and she had AIDS. When she was 19, she contracted leprosy. And so here she was, her husband had left her, and she found herself living in the streets with 3 kids. It was there that the Convoy of Hope worker found her, brought her into our program. She was trained, and her kids were put in school. And that day, with tears in her eyes, she said, I now have my own place to live, a home of my own. I now have my own business, and I'm feeding my own kids. And she said, and I also found Jesus. And, it was really interesting that day because as she was talking to me, she reached up and she kissed my cheek as a way of just saying thank you. And another woman walked by. Well, when she did, I noticed that her dress was soiled. It was frayed. It wasn't a nice dress she was wearing. So I suddenly understood that although her life had improved, she still had needs. Well, just as she was talking, another woman walked behind her, and she was carrying a brand new white dress. And so I called to the woman. I said, "Hey, is that dress for sale by any chance?" And she nodded that it was. And I bought that dress, not even knowing if it would fit this woman. And I have to tell you, the dress fit this woman perfectly. And, for me, it was just, again, God showing that he cares about every aspect of our lives.
Thank you. Beautiful story. Beautiful story. If you could talk to your readers, what's one hope that you have for people reading your book?
Yeah, I think that they would understand that taking care of yourself and being strong is not an act of selfishness. It's an act of selflessness. Because the stronger we are, the more that Jesus can do through us. And that's probably one of the most important takeaways. But, it's more than that. The book is filled with principles and practices that I think will help all of us.
That's great. A couple quick questions I have here at the end. Hal, one, if you go back to your 21-year-old self, what advice would you give?
Probably, like I said before, pray more, work less, and when making decisions, use more restraint. When you're younger, it's very easy to make quick decisions, and there are consequences to quick decisions. And learning to sleep on decisions is a really a good practice.
Yeah. Yes, it is. Anything you've been reading or watching lately you could recommend?
It's not a Christian book per se, although there is a God component. It's called The Lincoln Conspiracy by Brad Meltzer. And it's really the story of how there was an assassination attempt before he was even president of the United States. He was president-elect at the time, and a very powerful story of God's protection, and again, a great reminder of how much that God hates racism, and the steps that God went to really change the course of our nation. And to bring greater equality.
Great. Well, how could people go out and get your book, What Really Matters? Where would you like to point people to? How can they connect with you?
It's really available Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere books are sold. I appreciate people picking it up.
Great. Well, check out What Really Matters. It's a fantastic book, and I think it could help everybody who reads it to go the long haul so that they can care for themselves, so that they could actually make an impact in the world and the culture around them. There is a need to walk in to a place of what is the next kind thing that you could do in the midst of whatever situation God has called you to be in and help in. And so thank you for this conversation, Hal. I really enjoyed walking through some of your story. And then the moment as you were 50 laying on that table to say, hey, maybe there is a different way and a way that's more sustainable for the long haul. And the work that you're doing with Convoy of Hope is it's inspiring, and it's hopeful for many people to say this is work that actually matters. And it's something that people can get not only food and sustenance, but they could have hope in their lives for something more and something greater. So thank you for what you do. Thank you for this book, and thank you for this conversation. Really enjoyed it.
Great to be with you, Joshua. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode. If you want to see more episodes like this, go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron of the show. You can help us produce more episodes so that we can see the body of Christ look more like Jesus. If you become a patron on patreon.com/shiftingculture, you will get early access to episodes. You will get episode guides. You will get bonus shows, hopefully, and more. So go to patreon.com/shiftingculture and become a monthly patron. Also, leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It really helps us out and helps us find new listeners to the show. And just go and share this podcast with your friends, your family, your network, people that you think would enjoy it as well. Thank you again for listening to the show. I hope you have a great week.